During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk about crop residue. Why is it so important for farmers and what should we be doing with it?
Well, crop residue is just the above ground portions of the plant that's left out in the field. Now, you may say, well, there's the root system below ground too. Well, we're mainly just focused on what's above ground. And for farmers, they're worried about, okay, how do I get this out of the way that it doesn't hamper my planting so I can get every seed placed just at the right depth and not have a big pile of residue over the top of my seed so it can't make it out next spring. So that's one big concern that we've got. But what I look at the residue as this big positive out in the field. Hey, it's worth a lot of money out in fields because residue contains nutrients and it contains all the food that the microbial life in our soil are going to need. So if I can keep that residue in the field and use it for next year's crop, that's the best use for it.
Well, that is, except for the fact if you have livestock, what a lot of farmers will do is they will bale up their residue, whether it's corn stalks, soybean residue, wheat residue. I mean, whatever crop it is, you can certainly bale that up. You can use it for bedding. It's a source of fiber. So there are uses for this besides just in the field.
Even ethanol, Brian.
Right. And so what we get concerned about here is, hey, if you take this off the field and you don't somehow replace those nutrients. So that's a big key. But the other thing is, if you take all that residue off and you don't have some type of cover there, you're much more susceptible to soil erosion. So those are all things that farmers are trying to factor in when they decide whether or not they should leave that residue in the field.
All right, so one of the most common ways people will manage residue is with tillage. So if you look at farms across the United States and really around the world, you'll see farmers out there basically turning the fields black is a common phrase used in the upper Midwest, where they spin that soil upside down, flip the residue underneath, and bring fresh soil up on top, and it's a lot easier to work with and move around before they plant the next crop. So tillage is one way to deal with it, but there are also many farmers employing either minimum till or no-till out in their fields. So how do you deal with residue in a no-till situation? Well, many farmers will just put on residue managers in front of their planting units to push that residue off to the side to leave a little strip where the soil is clean and they can plant their seed and it can emerge without any disruption or obstacles in the way from crop residue. So that can definitely work. And then in a no-till system, by not disturbing that soil, we see an improvement in earthworm activity and other microbial life in the soil. Oftentimes, you'll see them breaking down all that residue naturally. In no-till, it's amazing for me to see fields where there's all kinds of residue out there, but just a few months into the growing season, it's all gone and it's all been broken down and pulled down into the soil.
One thing I wanted to get to is, yes, Darren's talking about managing that residue in the spring. I want to come back to fall, and before the residue is even on the ground, we're thinking as we're harvesting the crop about that overall residue management. So it depends a lot on how you set the combine, for example. We want to have a nice even spread of residue across our field. We don't want bunches, we don't want clumps of residue. And then the other thing is sizing the residue. So corn stalks, for example, are where we have a big problem, because let's say that you've got a big corn stalk and it's laying out in your field and you come along in the spring and you're trying to plant your seed. The problem is when we're out planting in the spring, it's cold, it's wet, and how well do you cut through that residue of a great big thick corn stalk? Not very well. So in the fall with the combine, we use chopping corn heads now to cut the corn stalk into small little pieces. We use a Capello chopping corn head, and that's worked out tremendously well for us. So now we get a better stand. We spread the residue even, it's in smaller pieces, so it's just much easier to manage.
Well, crop residue is certainly something very valuable to farmers. They will choose a lot of different ways to manage that residue to utilize the nutrients that are in it for the next crop.
Well, another thing that farmers are trying to manage on their farms is weed control, especially if they've got our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?